Hi, Jane. Okay. Good evening. Good evening. To a certain extent, what we're going to be doing this evening is almost getting ready for the Pesach Seder, and I think of that when I'm doing these parshiot at the beginning of Sefer Shmot, that some of the material overlaps with the material that we want to cover and we want to work on at our at our Pesach Seder. But you'll see there's a very, very specific direction that we're going to take this evening, and we're going to begin with the verse um, here in chapter 12. Chapter 12 is just an amazing chapter. Chapter 12 of Sefer Shmot of the book of Exodus. Chapter 12 is, according to the first Rashi in Chumash, that was the chapter that many scholars looked at the Torah and said, why didn't you start the Torah from chapter 12 in Exodus? Because until chapter 12 in Exodus, there really aren't any or many mitzvot. Starting with chapter 12, we really start giving instructions on how we should be performing a large number of mitzvot. For us, the most famous of them is Sipur Yitzit Mitzrayim, the mitzvah of having a Pesach Seder, but and also matzah. But we're going to see today, we're going to talk about a slightly different mitzvah. And so this famous verse towards the beginning of chapter 12, where we really begin the Torah as a book of mitzvot, says, V'kacha tochlu ota. And thus, this is how, thus you shall eat it. So we're talking here not about the matzah, we're talking here about the Korban Pesach. Now, sadly, unfortunately, we don't have the Korban Pesach today. With the Paschal Lamb, we just have it, symbolic pieces of it on the Seder plate. Sadly, until we have the Beit HaMikdash, till we return to the Temple Mount, we're not going to be able to really fulfill this mitzvah. But that doesn't stop us from talking about the obligations. So thus you shall eat it, the Paschal Lamb. Matnechem chagurim. Your loins should be girded. Now you should like belt. People in previous centuries wore more robes rather than shirts and pants, or shirts or blouses and skirts. And so since they had these like flowing type robes, to move quickly, they would have to like tie something around. Now, since I get to live in Yerushalayim and we have a monastery not very far from us, we get to see people who gird their loins. We see some of the, a few of the nuns, and once in a while, brothers, friars that walking around there, and they have to tie their cloaks around themselves. And that's what this means, that you should have your flowing robes like tied, girded, ready to move. We'll come back to that. Na'alechem biraglechem. Your shoes should be on your feet, again, ready to go at a moment's notice. Umekalchem biyadchem. And your staff, your makel, should be in your hand or near your hand, by your hand. Now, what was the staff for? Now, some people walk with the staff. When my wife and I go walking in the mornings, there's X percentage of people have these sticks, that they help them. I'm not exactly sure what the sticks do, but I guess they some upper body, whatever. But so some people walk with a stick to help, but most Meforshim think that the sticks were there for guiding animals, because they were taking the animals with them, so that they would use the sticks to direct sheep or cattle or whatever as they were moving. So you should have everything ready. Okay? Then, that's the first half of the verse. Second half, va'achaltem oto b'chipazon, and you shall eat it b'chipazon. The translation on the sheet in front of us, which is JPS, says hurriedly. Other people say the chipazon may mean more energetically, but hurriedly is the most common approach. You should eat it quickly. Eating meat quickly is not necessarily a good idea, but as quickly as you can safely eat it. And then a comment about this item, Pesach hu laHashem. It is the translation in front of us, Paschal offering, Passover offering to Hashem, to the eternal. Yud Ke Vav Ke, I like to translate as the eternal. It's that name that is the verb to be, God who always is. So we're seeing that we're not only told how to prepare it, there's a whole section, it should be on a spit, and it shouldn't be in water. There are all these, recipes, more or less, for the making of the Paschal Lamb. But here we're actually told not only are there specific instructions how to cook and prepare the lamb, there are also instructions exactly how to consume it. This is all very weird for most of us, and also alien because we don't have the Paschal Lamb. So for us, we don't really learn actually what we should be doing at the Seder as much as we are learning ideas about what should be happening in the Seder that helps us to better relate and re-experience what the Jews were going through as they left Egypt. So we start with Rashi. So Rashi is commenting on the last three words, Pesach hu laHashem. It is the Passover offering of the Lord. The offering is called Pesach, in allusion to the springing and passing over. Piseach in modern Hebrew means to limp. If you limp on it, it's called Piseach. And the idea of Posech means to like hop. So Hashem hopped over us. So there's something springing, passing over, because the Holy One, blessed be, passed over the houses of the Israelites who was between them escaped. Okay? The words, and you shall eat it in haste, is a spring offering, implies you do it, every act of sacrificial service connected with it in honor of heaven, and you should be doing it springing, leaping. The idea here is very important, believe it or not. It's a side issue, but I think it's fascinating. What Rashi's telling us, the offering is called Pesach. What he means by that is the holiday isn't called Pesach. The holiday is called Chag HaMatzot. I know we call it Pesach, but that's the rabbinic, traditional, customary name of the holiday. But the biblical name for the holiday and the way it gets described in our davening on Pesach is Chag HaMatzot, the holiday of Matzah. And the term Pesach specifically refers to this lamb, to this Paschal sacrifice. And the day of Pesach is Erev Chag HaMatzot. In other words, we have the Seder the night of the 15th, and then Chag HaMatzot begins. The day that's called Pesach in the Torah is the day when that sacrifice was offered. It's the 14th, the day before. So in the Torah, when they talk about Pesach, they talk about the sacrifice, and if they put it in a time frame, they talk about the 14th, not the actual holiday. So it's sort of a little bit unusual, but the rabbis eventually, and most Jews, call the holiday Pesach, Passover, and we don't call it Chag HaMatzot anymore. And so Rashi wanted to clarify that the term Pesach is a reference to the offering, and that's what we're talking about in this paragraph, the offering, the korban, the sacrifice. Okay, the Ibn Ezra, right below this. So, and this is how you should eat it. He wants you to know, not everybody agrees with this, but halachically, most people agree with it, even though we're going to see homiletically, in terms of sermons, there are different ideas. The Ibn Ezra wanted to know this reference is only to the Paschal Lamb in Egypt. In Masechet Pesachim, the tractate that talks about the korban, the offering, but also talks about the holiday, they go out of their way to distinguish between Pesach Mitzrayim, the way the Jews behaved on that Passover in Egypt, as opposed to Pesach Dorot, the Passover that we have been continuing to commemorate for 3,000 plus years. So according to the Ibn Ezra, this pasuk about eating it quickly and having the staff next to you and your shoes on and your, and a belt around your midsection, that was only in Egypt. The Jews in the time of the temple didn't have to fulfill these mitzvot. Having said that, he said, however, there are those people in Argalon. Now, I don't know where Argalon is. I looked up Argalon, and it's a place in Australia. So I don't know where, and they didn't know about Australia then. Apparently, when I looked around, Argalon was someplace somewhere in North Africa. But we're not exactly sure exactly what place he's talking about. But the concept is fascinating. That's why I put it in there. There was a Jewish community, probably in North Africa, that even today, the Ibn Ezra is writing this in the 12th century, the 1100s, and said these spiritual errants all leave their land on the 15th day in memory of the Exodus. So these people not only ate their Passover meal with a stick and shoes on, well, most of us have shoes on, but had the stick there and ready to move. But the next day, on the first day of Pesach, they would leave. They would go for a hike outside their community as if they were reliving the experience. Interesting. Must have been fun for the kids, but it's not an obligation. And he refers to these people. This is not my translation, the Sfaria translation. I would have said these mistaken people. He calls them these spiritual errants. They're in error. Would actually leave their community of Argalon on the first day of Pesach to fulfill and relive the Yetziat Mitzrayim experience. It's a fascinating issue that we're not going to get into deeply right now, but there are things that we do at our Seder that are supposed to represent reliving the Exodus experience. But here we're being told, but we don't go as far as the people in Egypt went. There are things we do, but there are also things we don't do. And having the staff ready and, having a belt on and your shoes on, those are not requirements. Okay. The Sforno, when he's talking about this, again, this belt or this some sort of sash or something that holds your garments closely to your body so it's easier for you to move when you're wearing a robe type thing. It meant ready to commence marching. We find a similar expression in connection with the prophet Elijah, where he is described as V'yashnes matnav, he bound up his loins. The expression reflects absolute confidence in God's assistance of the undertaking one is about to embark on. In other words, they were so sure that they were going to quickly, soon be leaving Egypt. Everything was ready. They had the stick ready. They had their shoes on. They belted their robes. This all represented their perfect faith in the fact that they were going to be leaving Egypt imminently. And therefore, it meant that. But again, it's not a requirement nowadays, even though I have seen, especially Sephardic families, that try to do some of these things so that they feel that they're experiencing the Yetziat Mitzrayim. But it's not an obligation whatsoever anymore. Okay. The Chizkunim. The point here, we're now moving away from the more halachic interpretations, which was what Rashi and the Ibn Ezra are talking about, and now we're getting more conceptual. The Torah's point here is to forbid dividing preparation of the meat of the Passover meal into two or more courses. In other words, the meal is supposed to move quickly. On a Friday night, you have a fish course and you have a soup course, and you have a salad course, and you have a main course, and you have a dessert course. But in Egypt, they just had one meal. Everything was on the table. You ate as much as you could, ready to go. And there are people that feel that even nowadays, the Pesach meal should be more simple like that. I know that's not what most people do. Most people do have a multi-course dinner, and all of that is fine. As I get older, the idea of eating so late at night no longer appeals to me. So we tend to minimize the eating that goes on. But I mean, historically, we were used to, one of the major big meals of the year. Growing up as a kid in Boston, the three big meals of the year, usually the first Seder, the second Seder, we didn't, my mother, Aleh Hashem, didn't put the same effort into the second night. But the first night of Pesach, the first night of Rosh Hashanah, and Thanksgiving. Those were the three big meals of the year. My mother was a wonderful cook, but plain, except for those three times. Wow. But the Chizkuni is saying, no, it should be a simple, quick, ready-to-move meal, at least in Egypt. Should it be true today? Separate question. As this would negate the condition that it be eaten in haste, concerning the Torah writing the words ad boker until morning twice, not in our verse, but in the verse coming up, you have the term, everything has to be finished by the morning. Twice it says it. Rashi says that this means when something appears twice in chapter 12 of Exodus, Rashi says that means that it not only refers to the Pesach in Mitzrayim in Egypt, but refers to Pesach forever and ever. So that since you have to finish the meal way before morning, you have to make sure that you do it a little bit quickly. Part of that concept that should still exist today. But for us, we try to finish everything by midnight. We're going to see that idea coming up. Okay, so I want to go down to the Malbim now. And so everything till now has been first really looking at the mitzvah, and then comparing it to nowadays. And the Malbim, and from now on, we're getting more to it, talking about the ideas involved here. So the Malbim, writing in the middle of the 19th century, says the CHIPAZON, that word for hasty or speedily or energetically, it can mean that also, represents the haste of God to redeem them before the time. What's the haste? They were supposed to be in Egypt 400 years. They were only in Egypt 210 years. So the haste was to rush the Jews back to Israel. And to get to 400, we have to count back to the birth of Yitzchak. The offspring of Abraham, were in a state of galut, of being strangers from the birth of his first Jewish offspring, which is Yitzhak, until they leave Egypt. So the 400 years, we got a reduction in our exile sentence. So that, according to the Malbim, that's the CHIPAZON, that Hashem reduced the amount of time that we actually had to stay in Egypt. Now, from here to the end, I think everything we're going to be doing is Hasidic, which is a little bit unusual, but just the comments that I found most interesting were in the Hasidic field. So the first we're going to see is the Me'or V'Shemesh. The Me'or V'Shemesh is Reb Kalman Clonimus Halevi Epstein, and he was part of the very famous Epstein family that included the Aruch HaShulchan and the Torah Tamima, a very famous Lithuanian family. And this particular member of the family became a Chassid. Every family has their black sheep, I guess, that he became a Chassid. But he remained, even though he kept Hasidic customs and whatever, he remained a very Lithuanian type thinker, very sharp in his approach to things. And so this is, I think, the longest comment we're going to do tonight. I try to keep them shorter than this, but I was fascinated with some of his comments. I hope you're going to find it fascinating too. One should pay attention to the reason for this mitzvah, why the eating should be hasty specifically. What's this big deal that we're in such a rush? We know they're not going to leave Egypt until sunrise. So, I mean, they're starting to eat right after dark. That's a lot of hours. Why are we emphasizing speed? So the first interpreters were saying, oh, it had to do with being ready to move. Okay, but the Mavor Shemesh is looking at more of an idea of haste rather than a requirement of haste. So here he says, we consider based on what is said in the Haggadah. This matzah that we eat, what is it for? That's the question of the wise son. What's the reason for this? Okay. And that we eat, what's it for? Also, they had not prepared any provision for the way. In other words, they had to be ready to move quickly, and so they had food itself that was made fast. I mean, the first fast food was matzah, right? Way before McDonald's, the first fast food was matzah. You had to cook it fast because they had to be ready to move. And this reason still needs explanation. We still have to think more about this. It's possible to say that the principle of God's commandment is to be drawn after the cravings to eat food. The mitzvah is don't obsess over food. It's a terrible thing to say to Jews. I mean, we love eating. I mean, but anyways, but he's saying the whole idea is that we shouldn't obsess over eating. Okay. And to prove his point, the Me'or V'Shemesh, this Hasidic Rebbe, goes back and says, this goes back to the statement of the verse, from every tree of the garden you may surely eat. He's going back to Adam Arishon, to Adam in the Garden of Eden, when God says you can eat from all the trees except for one. You can't eat from the tree of Eitz Hadat Tov V'Ra. You can't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. What's that mean? You're permitted to eat from all of them, just so long as there is no difference in your eyes between eating from this one because you crave it since it is delicious, or the thorn in its lowliness, which is disgusting. He's going to say this in a couple of more lines. Maybe I should wait till I get there. Okay, let's do 3 more lines, then I'll go back. The difference is forbidden to you, and this is from the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. It wishes to say that you shouldn't distinguish between that which is tasty and that which is disgusting. And we can say that the tree of knowledge isn't, I'm now 5 lines up for the bottom of the page, isn't, and I should have underlined it in your printed copies like something I emphasize in the back page, isn't a specific tree, but rather Adam was commanded equally regarding all of them not to distinguish between good and evil with regard to his appetites. In other words, I should, if I have a bunch of food on the table, I should eat them indiscriminately. According to this idea, I shouldn't be overly concerned with which kind of foodstuffs I like more than others. This part of it to actually fulfill it is very difficult because there are halachot in terms of saying blessings that you should say a bracha on a food that you like better before you say a bracha on something that is less appealing to you. For example, forgetting about the 7 special species of trees, which we're going to talk, where everybody's going to think about next week as we get ready for Tu B'Shvat. So forgetting about the fact that if you have one of the 7 species in front of you, you have a date or a fig, that should come before an apple or an orange. Okay, forgetting about that, let's assume you don't have any of the 7 species on the table. But the halach in the Shulchan Aruch says, if I like apples more than oranges, I should say my B'rei Priya eights on an apple and not on the orange. So it seems to go halachically, we end up going against this position of the Me'or Shemesh. Having said that, let's ignore the halacha and take his philosophic point, which is at the Seder, we're being told, don't worry about or don't think about which food you like better. Think about the mitzvah. Think about, thanking God for food in general and not necessarily having specific things that you like in mind that should be uppermost in your mind. And then he ends up saying that when it says you shouldn't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, that means you shouldn't differentiate between different trees. You shouldn't use your personal preferences and tastes to tell you which tree is good and which tree is bad. They're all good, and you should be finding goodness everywhere. And so when in the Gemara, there's a famous debate over which was the specific tree, which was the tree of good and evil, according to the Me'or Shemesh, that was merely homiletics. It was just theoretical so that you could come up with certain homiletics, certain philosophic ideas. There really wasn't a specific tree. It just meant accept all the trees equally, appreciate them all on the same level. But rather, Adam was commanded, I'm now 5 lines up from the bottom, but rather Adam was commanded equally regarding all of them, not to distinguish between good and evil with regard to his appetites. And for this reason, our fathers went down to Egypt to purify their material selves and appetites by means of the yoke of subjugation. In other words, being tortured, having this terrible experience, was to break them from being spoiled about lifestyle. Interesting. I'm not sure I totally agree with this, but it's a fascinating idea. In order to right the sin of Adam. In other words, when we don't become Epicureans, when we're not so particular about our eating, we are somehow correcting the sin of Adam and Chava, of Adam and Eve. And for this, we are commanded to eat on Pesach bread of affliction. Let's be honest. I mean, matzah tastes pretty nasty. I mean, it's not really, a delectable food. I love to bake, actually, and I really like my challah. I think I make a delicious challah, but I also bake matzah, and I mean, there's no effort in the matzah to make it tasty or fluffy or good looking. The idea is just get it done before the 18 minutes are up. Keep that oven hot and roll it out, punch holes in it, get it in and get it out. There is all of that effort that normally we put into appearance and taste. For the matzah, we put all of that effort into speed and making sure it doesn't rise. So we're commanding on Pesach bread of affliction, which is tasteless without salt or preparation. This is for this intention, to teach that a person should not be drawn after human pleasures, top of the back page, which are illusory. They're subjective. They're phony. Everybody can make them up for themselves. We're looking for some objective realities in truth and goodness. So the matzah is called bread of affliction or bread of poverty, because the poor person isn't able to choose food that they crave or enjoy, and is forced to eat whatever comes to their hands first. even if it isn't delicious. So too with us. We eat matzah from dough, no seasonings, can't be any salt, can't be any tasty things in it. It would be the same to us if it was sweet, but there isn't sweetness. It's just to sustain ourselves, to serve God and sanctify ourselves by eating matzah for 7 days. So in other words, according to the Moav Shemesh, he's now applying it specifically to matzah, but they're told to eat the material of the korban, the different parts of the korban, told to eat it fast because they're not supposed to be sitting there and savoring it. You're supposed to cook it quickly and eat it quickly and be ready to move, because we're being taught that tasty food is not the major goal, or should not be the major goal in our life. It's a side issue. It doesn't mean you can't normally do it, but it means on Pesach we should truly ignore it because it's not that important. There are much more important issues. Okay. To sanctify ourselves by eating matzah for 7 days. I'm in the 5th line. The 7 days correspond to the 70 years, which is considered to be a biblical lifespan, to show us that by means of from the need to cast away from opposite all worldly delights and from one's desires. This is alluded to in the statement, this month of which we eat. Why? For they did not have enough. They had also not prepared provisions, meaning we receive instruction from my ancestors who were on this level where they weren't drawn to worldly pleasures. Now, this is fascinating, and the idea is sort of cool, but it doesn't ring totally true, because we do know later in the desert, the Jews definitely fell from this level, and they complained about the man. They complained about the food. They complained about a lot of things. And some of the complaints didn't just have to do with having no water, which is a legitimate complaint, had to do with the taste of the food, which is, when you're traveling through the desert, is less of a legitimate complaint. But, when you're in the same situation for 40 years, you do want some variety. Okay, I don't want to overly criticize them. But the Rebbe, the Moav Shemesh, is criticizing this need for Epicurean delight. And we learn that from these verses about just eat it quickly. You're in a hurry. Don't think about the taste. There shouldn't be any, extra taste material added to these things. I just want to get to the last sentence of this paragraph on the back side, and it's the end of the 3rd line from the end. For this is the strength of kavod, our cravings, desires, appetites, and also 7 days matzot you shall eat, that this shall be on your heart forever. That we should, there's nothing wrong with liking good and tasty food, nothing wrong with that, but it should be placed in its proper perspective. It's not, we do eat to live, we don't live to eat. And that's the major idea that the Moav Shemesh is pushing in this paragraph. Now, he may have been a bit of an ascetic all the time. There are other Torahs that he wrote that make it sound like he tended towards being very simple in his tastes, not just this one, but others as well. Or it may just be that he's saying this is about Pesach to give us the pecking order of importance of issues in our lives. Okay, so we have 2 more Hasidic Rebbeim we have to take a look at. The first one is Reb Tzadok. Now, Reb Tzadok is very similar to the Moav Shemesh, Rabbi Epstein. Reb Tzadok of Lublin was also originally a Lithuanian Talmid Chacham who became a Chassid. His story of becoming Hasidic is long and complicated, and it involved his first marriage going bad, and he just ran away from the marriage, and the people that took him in and like put him back together from this shattered life were a number of Hasidic Rebbeim. So he was drawn to them. It's a sort of sad story, but okay. So Reb Tzadok says, humanity's entry into the service of God must begin with haste. You got to start rushing. You got to rush in headlong. And we find that the Paschal offering brought in Egypt was eaten in haste, which is what we've been discussing, right? Which was not the case with the Paschal offering brought in later generations. So here, Reb Tzadok is very careful. It was only that first year, which is similar to the Ibn Ezra. Because when a person begins to sever himself from all the desires of this world to which he is attached, he must guard the moment in which the will of God stirs up within him, and make haste in that moment to leave them worldly things behind. Perhaps then, if he can run away from these worldly things, that speed will perhaps help him to succeed in achieving this new lifestyle. Afterwards, he can once again proceed with moderation and slowness, as is the law of the Paschal offering in later generations. Rev Itamar Eldar is commenting on this Reb Tzadok. And I'm going to start it, but I'm going to stop in the middle to tell a story. So I have to watch the time a little bit here. Rev Itamar Eldar is a professor or a Rebbe at Yeshivat Har Etzion, and he gives lectures about Hasidic interpretations of Parshiot. And a lot of his lectures have been recorded on the Yeshivat Har Etzion website. So I took this from an article that was based on one of those lectures. And in commenting on what Reb Tzadok said about you need speed to make the transition from not so frum to very frum, you got to rush and leave things behind to succeed in that effort. On that point, Rav Eldar makes the following comment. Had the people of Israel looked back for a moment as they fled from Pharaoh in Egypt, in the manner of Lot's wife, if we were leaving in a leisurely way, if we weren't being pushed out and rushing headlong to get out of Egypt, we might have been like Lot's wife and looked back at Egypt, and maybe even looked back longingly to where we had lived our lives and our parents' lives. We had been there for a while. And if they, like Lot's life, turned around and looked, they might have had regrets and returned. We know some of them wanted to return because the Exodus took place in haste. There was no turning back, no chance to turn back. You know, sometimes when I both as a when I was taking kids, when I was teaching like on Tiyulim, on hikes and things, you just got to rush them, because if you don't rush them, they'll never get started. And I do this with my own kids. You just got to keep moving. And if you leave something behind, it's one day, big deal. What difference to make? Just keep moving. Otherwise, you don't get anything done. So that similarly, the Havdil to the Jews, just got to get going, get out of there. Okay. Because the Exodus took place in haste, there was no turning back, and the movement was always forward. It was the haste alone that ensured a total severance from the straits of Egypt. If we had done it in a slow, lackadaisical way, many people might not or would not have wanted to leave. So I emphasized this next sentence. This is the aspect of haste. The haste is the aspect of above time. Yotze, outside the normal space-time continuum. For he passed over the designated end and took them out in great haste in no time. Just a single moment, and immediately they came from Ramses to Sukkot, and they gathered together in a moment 600,000 from all of the land of Egypt. As Rashi explains, he bore you on eagle's wings. The whole thing was chick-chuck. And that's what made it work. That's what caused it to succeed. Now, Rav Eldar, in this long article that he wrote on the Yeshivat Har Etzion website, brings out a very famous story in Rabbi Nachman. I was thinking, should I put Rabbi Nachman on the page? It's long and it'll take up space. And I can tell it to you very, very quickly, even though the story itself is long. Rabbi Nachman, in his stories, most people, when they learn Rabbi Nachman, learn his sayings and his Torahs, but he also has a couple of books of stories. And one of his famous stories is called the Tam and the Talmid Chacham, the simpleton, the simple man, and the scholar. And in this story, there were two young men who grew up together. They were boys together, became adults together, got married near each other, and they were living in this simple place. But one of them was very simple, and he was a shepherd, and he took care of flocks. The other became a scholar and a Talmid Chacham, and he taught classes, and he was very well respected for his great intellectual acumen. One day, the king decided, the story doesn't say why. Most of the stories of Rabbi Nachman have a king in them, and the king, of course, is Hashem. But, okay. So one day, the king of whatever land these people lived in sent both of them the exact same message. And the message was with a messenger. And there was a simple messenger and a scholarly messenger. So the simple messenger went to the simple guy, and the message was, same message for both of them: come to the palace. The king wants to get together with you. The simple person gets this message from, again, a simple delivery service, and he quickly runs to his wife and he says, I got to go. The king wants me. I can't even stop the change. I can't do anything. I got to run out the door. And he runs out the door. And when he gets to the carriage that's waiting for him to bring him to the king, there is a clean, nice set of clothes ready for him, and he changes in the carriage, getting ready to the king. I mean, he didn't pause for anything. He just ran out the door. The scholar who gets the message, the same simple message from a scholarly delivery person, starts to ask him, why does the king want to see me? What can this possibly be about? And the scholarly person is saying, you're right. That's a good question. Let's discuss it. And they discuss it through the entire night. And then the next morning, the scholarly person, the neighbor of the simple guy, turns to the scholarly delivery person and says, I don't believe there's a king at all. I think the entire thing is made up. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. And the scholarly messenger person can't convince him that there really is a king. In other words, people that come to the conclusion that there is no God don't tend to be simple people. They tend to be the sophisticated people. And that was like Rabbi Nachman, who's writing this around the time of the Enlightenment, had in mind, but that wasn't his major point. His major point is there are some times in life it's better to be pashut and just get the job done. And that's what we're being told on the first night of Pesach. Don't think it through. Just do it. Sometimes there is a tremendous benefit in doing that. Not all the time. There are many things in life that you have to sit down and consider and think through. But there are X number of things in your life that the best thing to do is just rush out and do it. Otherwise, it just won't happen. And you'd see it Mitzrayim. And according to Rabbi Nachman, the decision to really love God are in that first category of things. You just got to rush out and do it. And it ends up being a very powerful story. It's a very powerful story. If I remember, I will send out on WhatsApp the story for people that want to read it. I'll put the makor on the website. It's just interesting to read. Parts of it are funny as well. So it's so bli neder. I'll put it on the WhatsApp. And one last Hasidic comment from the Kedushat Levi, Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, perhaps after the Baal Shem Tov, the most beloved of all the Hasidim, Hasidic masters. The Kedushat Levi is initially a little bit hard to understand, but I think there's a fascinating point in it. Okay, I have to rush a little bit. This is the word matzah. Matzah. What's the word matzah? It indicates the creation of the world. The word matzah. Why? Because they're round. Originally, they were round. Why does it represent the creation of the world? And that the world has a creator. Somebody makes the matzah, but what's that? Okay. Who created it out of absolute nothingness, ex nihilo. For the word chametz bears the sense of we do not delay machmitz in judgment, or we do not delay machmitz in mitzvot. Machmitzin means delay. Now, that's not true. The word machmitz actually means to ferment. To ferment or to become or to go bad. In other words, vinegar is called chometz in Hebrew. It means, it either fermented or it went bad. That's it's a slow process that quite often doesn't succeed. So, but we use that word, a mitzvah, a mitzvah that comes to your hand. Don't let it become chametz. Don't let it go bad. Don't let it, with mitzvot, mitzvot is like milk. It's got an expiration date that you have to be very strict about on it. You just got to do it. Okay. There's a time when it has to be done. And so matzah represents that rushing headlong to do it. And chametz represents the delay that quite often ruins the product. Okay? Machmitzin means delay. The chametz is something old, and the opposite is matzah. That is something new. Our Creator has shown us through the mitzvah of matzah that there is one who created the world and who every day and every moment is quickly renewing it. It's happening all the time. There's no rest. It's always moving. By the way, you feel the same way in astronomy or physics. Everything's moving and moving faster and faster and faster. That's the way the creative process is. That there is one who created the world and who every day renews it, as he did during the exodus from Egypt when he performed unnatural marvels. For all 10 plagues were unnatural. When we clearly understand this, we will not move our hands and feet to do anything other than brings glory to his name. Blessed and exalted be he. Baruch u'meromamhu. We must fear him. I don't like fear as much as we must revere or be in awe of him and the awe of his exaltedness, since he is great and the ruler. And we must fiercely love him when we see that he, blessed be, loves us with eternal love. In other words, not just the matzah and not just the Pesach have to be done quickly. It's teaching us about this kind of enthusiasm and this momentum within performing mitzvot. That's where the Kedusha Levi is coming from. And this is something that should be true all the time. I mean, even in the morning, we should be, like rush to shul, be on time to shul, whether, for minyan or Shabbos a little less so, but a little bit later. But I mean, the idea is we're rushing headlong into the Korban Pesach with the CHIPAZON and eating it with the staff next to you ready to go, and the matzah, which has to be baked so quickly. They are teaching us about this tremendous movement towards doing the right thing. And once you feel that you've begun this movement, keep it going. Don't stop. Keep the push. Make sure that it's finished before that 18-minute bell goes off. I don't know if any of you ever baked matzah, but the first time I ever baked matzah, I still bake matzah. I still like baking matzah. Now I do it with one of my wife's sons-in-laws. We work at it together. It's a lot of fun. But I mean, and there's the bell. And I also, when I was teaching in Stanford, I Baruch Hashem, I had the Rabbi Walk slush fund, and I splurged $1,000 to buy a pizza oven so that we could bake matzah. I really liked the idea of, and the kids get into it, and it's like, and I try to say, well, matzah and mitzvah, they're almost the same word. I mean, you just add a vav. This is how we do all the mitzvah, and there should be this enthusiasm, and there should be this speed. And one day I sort of sat down and thought about it. Why did this appeal to me? And so I have to quickly tell the story. Don't have much time, but I'm going to say it quickly. The first time I ever baked matzah, I was in high school. And I went with a friend of mine. We lived in Malden, Massachusetts, which is about 10 miles from Brookline, Massachusetts, where the Boston Rebbe was. And on Erev Pesach, the Boston Rebbe used to bake matzah. And there would be, I don't know, 20, 25 of us baking matzah. Everybody had their own job. I was usually rolling it out. And while we were doing all these jobs, the Rebbe was walking around singing Hallel. And the Rebbe was a Levi and had a very pleasant voice. And it was really nice because the Leviim in the Beit Mikdash used to sing while the Korban Pesach was being brought, and it was the same time of day. We were doing this right afternoon, Erev Pesach, and we were rushing to do it. And when you were done baking, we baked for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, about maybe 3, maybe 4 batches. The Rebbe gave everybody one matzah. And when he gave you the matzah, it was with a bracha, and that was the matzah that you ate that night for matzat mitzvah, for the, it was on your aram. That's the one that you ate to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah. And I was just becoming religious at the time. I was still in public school. And there was, I don't know, the experiences was a lot. And so that was in 1966, 67, junior year, maybe sophomore year of high school. In 1989, I was Shabbat HaGadol in Florida. And I just went to a mincha minyan, and the Boston Rebbe was there. He was visiting. He was going to be in Miami for the Chag that year for some reason, because he was always in Boston. And he was talking Shabbat HaGadol about the mitzvah of matzah. And I'm sitting there, I'm starting to cry. And afterwards, the Rebbe stayed a little bit longer, so I went over, and he wanted to know why I was crying, and I said, I don't know if you remember me. The Rebbe's very short. I'm relatively tall, so I'm looking down at the Rebbe, and I said I was thinking about that in the late 60s, I baked matzah with you in Boston, and it was very important to my becoming religious. And the Rebbe then got very serious, and he's a very friendly, jovial, friendly. Oliver Shalom, he's passed away, but he was always very friendly and smiley. But he got very serious for a minute. He took both of my hands in his two hands, and he looked up at me and he says, never forget, there's power in the matzah. He's right. And that power in the matzah does not come from the water and the flour. The power in the matzah comes from our energy and our, hopefully, exuberance and enthusiasm in doing it. And that's the way we have to do mitzvot. That's what Pesach, more than anything else, teaches us. Once you feel you have found the right thing that must be done, go do it. And you have to do it with speed. You have to do it with enthusiasm. You have to do it more than anything else with a whole heart. And that's how you eat Korban Pesach. That's how you bake and eat the matzah. And hopefully that's how we really spend the energy that our life has into the things and invest it into those things that are really important and meaningful to us. And it's the lesson of the matzah, and it's the lesson of the Pesach. And hopefully it's something that we live throughout our lives. And when we find things that are worth it, invest the energy, invest the enthusiasm, and just get it done. Okay, thank you very much for joining this evening. I know there weren't that many people live tonight, but let people know, please, that I'll put up the recording tomorrow morning.
Thank you very much.
And Kathy, thanks for joining us.
It was wonderful. Look forward to joining you again.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.